The world of magic doesn't end with the turning of a page. Love rises and falls anew, forbidden like poison or blazing like a phoenix's flame. The heroes we thought we knew uncover their hearts once more. So step into the enchantment of emotion and welcome to a world where love is written anew. The letter arrived on a quiet Thursday evening, long after Hermione Granger had stopped expecting surprises. Rain tapped against her kitchen window in steady rhythm, blurring the lights of Muggle London into hazy gold and grey. She was halfway through a cup of tea and an unfinished report for the Department of Magical Law Enforcement when the owl appeared, pale as smoke, waiting with unusual stillness on her sill. Hermione frowned. The owl wasn't one she recognized. Its feathers shimmered faintly, like frost beneath moonlight, and tied to its leg was a letter sealed with silver wax. Not the Ministry's crimson emblem, but an ornate crest she hadn't seen in a decade, a serpent twined around a rose. Malfoy. Her fingers hesitated for only a second before breaking the seal. Granger, I require your professional assistance regarding a matter of magical instability at my family's estate. The situation is deteriorating. I would not ask were it not urgent. Draco Malfoy. No explanation, no greeting, no apology for the years of silence. Hermione sat back, heart uncomfortably aware of its own rhythm. She hadn't seen Draco Malfoy since the post-war trials. He had been thinner then, pale and defiant, trying to atone in his own distant way. The Wizengamot had spared him prison, thanks in part to her testimony, something she'd done for truth's sake, not for him. At least, that was what she'd told herself. Now, 10 years later, his name still carried the echo of a past she preferred not to revisit. And yet, magical instability? That was her field. Malfoy Manor had always been old magic. Ancient wards, tangled enchantments, and secrets whispered through generations. A place like that, left unattended, could become dangerous. Still, why would he call her? She stood, moving to the fireplace. The green flames of the flue flared as she threw in a pinch of powder. "Ministry Archives," she called. And moments later, a familiar face appeared. Ron Weasley, his hair more copper than red these days, and a tired grin softening his freckled features. "Hermione, burning the midnight oil again." "Something's come up," she said, handing him the letter through the flame. He whistled low. "Blimey, from Malfoy. That's not the kind of pen pal I thought you'd have." "It's about the manor," Hermione said. "He says it's unstable, possibly cursed." Ron's brow furrowed. That place was bad news even before the war. "You sure you want to poke around there?" Hermione hesitated, looking out the window again at the storm-dark sky. "If the curse is spreading, someone could get hurt. He's asking for help, and if it's genuine, I can't ignore it." Ron sighed. "Just be careful, all right? Bloke's got a talent for trouble." She smiled faintly. "Don't we all?" By dawn, she was packed. Her wand, field journal, several detection charms, and a small silver pendant she always wore when investigating cursed sites. It had belonged to her mother, a reminder that courage was rarely loud, but it could be steady. She apparated just beyond the Wiltshire gates at sunrise. The Malfoy grounds stretched before her like a dream half frozen, mist rising from dark hedges, the distant manor looming against a pale sky. The grand iron gates creaked open on their own. Every instinct urged her to turn back. But Hermione Granger was not a witch who retreated from mystery. As she approached, the air grew colder. Magic pulsed faintly under her feet, old and restless. The manor was breathtaking in its way, white stone and high windows, but the beauty was bruised now. Ivy crawled over cracked marble. The once bright fountain in the courtyard was dry, its mermaid statue broken at the neck. And standing at the great oak doors was Draco Malfoy. He looked different, older, though not in the way time alone could explain. His hair was still pale, but a little unkempt, his grey eyes shadowed. His robes were simple, almost austere. "Granger," he said quietly, as if uncertain she would come. "Malfoy." A pause, the kind of silence that carried 10 years of unspoken history. "I wasn't sure you'd answer," he said finally. "I wasn't sure either," she admitted. "You said it was urgent." "It is." He gestured toward the door. "Come inside." The entrance hall was vast and cold. Dust motes shimmered in thin sunlight filtering through tall windows. Hermione could feel the house watching, not with eyes, but with memory. "What exactly is happening here?" she asked. Draco's jaw tightened. "Strange noises at night, rooms that shift, portraits whispering spells no one remembers. My mother's old chambers sealed themselves 3 months ago. No charm can open them." Hermione touched one of the carved columns. The magic beneath was twisted, ancient layers overlapping like tangled threads. "Have you told the Ministry?" "No," he said sharply. "I don't want them here. They'd rather tear the place down than understand it." "And you think I will?" His eyes met hers. "You always did." Something in his tone, weary, almost sincere, caught her off guard. "All right," she said after a moment. "Show me where it started." He led her down a corridor lined with portraits of pale, elegant ancestors. Some turned away as they passed, others whispered behind painted hands. At the end of the hall stood a heavy door. "When I opened this last week," Draco said, "the room wasn't there. It was something else." "Something else?" He opened it. Hermione stepped forward and felt the world twist. The room beyond was no longer part of the manor. It was an underground chamber, walls etched with serpentine runes glowing faint green. The air smelled of old stone and magic older still. And at the center, an ancient book hovered in mid-air, pages turning as if alive. A chill crept down her spine. "Merlin's beard," she whispered. "Malfoy, what have you done?" He looked at her with quiet dread. "I think," he said, "we've just woken something that was never meant to be found." The air in the underground chamber felt alive, heavy with the weight of centuries. Hermione's wand hand trembled slightly as she moved closer, the tip casting a soft golden glow over the runes that crawled like serpents along the stone floor. The book at the center floated just above a stone pedestal, its pages turning in a slow, deliberate rhythm, though no breeze stirred the air. Each turn released a faint whisper, as though the parchment itself were remembering. Draco stood a few feet behind her, his voice low. "It appeared 3 nights ago. I thought it was a trick of the wards at first, but when I tried to close the door, it stayed. Every night it opens to this room, and every morning it's gone again." Hermione took a cautious step forward. "You shouldn't have come near it. Ancient artifacts like this can attach themselves to bloodlines." "I'm aware," Draco said dryly, though the edge in his tone was weaker than usual. "Believe me, I tried ignoring it. The manor didn't like that." "The manor?" He gave a small, humorless smile. "It's been restless since my parents left. Portraits speaking in languages I can't understand. Doors opening to rooms that shouldn't exist. It's as if the house itself is remembering something." Hermione circled the book, eyes scanning the glowing runes. "These aren't ordinary enchantments. They're Slytherin sigils, the same kind I found when I studied his relics after the war." Draco frowned. "You think this is connected to him?" She nodded. Slytherin was obsessed with preserving power through blood and memory. He experimented with spells that bound the essence of a place to its descendants. If this book belonged to him or one of his followers, it could explain why it surfaced here. As she spoke, the book suddenly stopped turning. Its pages fluttered once, then stilled. For a heartbeat, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. And then, softly, a voice spoke. Not loud, not even clear, but unmistakably human and ancient. "Blood remembers what mind forgets." Hermione froze. Draco's hand tightened around his wand. "Did you hear that?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. "It's sentient." The voice came again, echoing through the chamber like a sigh. "The keeper must awaken. The debt must be paid." And then the book snapped shut. The glow in the runes died instantly, plunging the room into near darkness. Hermione's wand light flickered as though struggling to stay alive. "Back!" she ordered, grabbing Draco's sleeve and pulling him toward the door. They stumbled out just as the chamber walls began to tremble. Dust fell from the ceiling. A deep, rumbling growl rose from the floor, not from any creature, but from the magic itself, twisting and protesting. The door slammed shut behind them with a sound like thunder. For a long moment, neither spoke. Their hearts raced in unison, the echo of the voice still hanging in the silence. Draco was the first to break it. What in Merlin's name was that supposed to mean? The keeper? The debt? Hermione pressed a hand to her forehead, thinking rapidly. It sounds like a curse rooted in inheritance, some kind of magical bond passed down through your family, maybe a spell that requires renewal or tribute. So, I'm being haunted because some ancestor forgot to pay magical taxes? She shot him a sharp look, but his sarcasm only half masked his unease. "It's not funny, Malfoy. This could be older than your family line itself." He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes distant. "Then it explains why the house hasn't been the same. I thought it was grief. After Mother left for France, the manor just felt empty. But maybe it was waking up." Hermione studied him quietly. He looked tired, not just from sleepless nights, but from years of trying to bear a legacy that refused to let go. "Can you take me to the oldest part of the estate?" she asked. "Somewhere untouched since the founder's time." He hesitated. "There's one place. My father never allowed anyone inside." "Then that's exactly where we're going." They walked in silence through the long corridors of Malfoy Manor. The walls were lined with portraits whose eyes flickered open as they passed. A faint whisper trailed behind them, half warning, half plea. At last, they reached a spiral staircase descending deep into the foundations. The air grew colder with each step. Torches along the walls lit themselves as they passed, illuminating carved serpents winding up the stone. "This is older than the manor itself," Hermione murmured. "These stones predate the Tudor era." When they reached the bottom, Draco stopped before a massive iron door bound with silver sigils. In its center, a crest gleamed faintly. a serpent encircling a rose, the same emblem as his seal. "My family calls this the Vault of Echoes," Draco said. "It's where the oldest records are kept, or were. No one's entered since my grandfather's time." Hermione raised her wand. "Alohomora." Nothing. The door didn't even tremble. She frowned, then placed her palm against the cold iron. "It's keyed to blood," she said. "Only a Malfoy can open it." Draco exhaled. "Of course it is." He stepped forward, pressing his hand to the center of the crest. The silver serpent glowed, coiling tighter until it bit its own tail. The door shuddered, then slowly began to swing inward with a hiss of air, as though exhaling after centuries. Inside lay a small circular room filled with old scrolls and glass jars. Dust covered everything like snow. In the center stood a stone pedestal similar to the one in the chamber above, though this one was empty, save for an inscription carved deep into its surface. Hermione bent to read it aloud. "Where the keeper fails, the house shall remember. Blood must balance memory, or all shall be unmade." She straightened slowly. "It's a binding curse. Slytherin must have enchanted your ancestral home as a repository, not just for memories, but for magic itself. It stores power through generations. But if the keeper, your family, fails to maintain it, it retaliates." Draco's face was pale. "Retaliates? How?" "By consuming the living descendants," she said softly. A faint rustle came from the shadows. Both wands snapped upward. From the far wall, one of the portraits stirred. It was a man with silver hair and eyes like mercury, unmistakably a Malfoy, though older than any Draco had seen. The painted figure leaned forward, studying them. "So," the portrait said, voice echoing through the vault, "the keeper returns at last, and he brings a Gryffindor witch. How curious." Hermione's breath caught. "Who are you?" The portrait smiled faintly. "I am Cassian Malfoy, first keeper of the house, the one who made the pact with Salazar Slytherin himself." Draco took a step forward. "What do you mean, pact?" Cassian's painted eyes gleamed. "To preserve our bloodline's strength, Slytherin gave us a fragment of his own spell, the Book of Memory. It guards our house and ensures our magic endures. But such power demands balance. The keeper must renew the bond once every century." "And if he doesn't?" Hermione asked. "Then the house devours its heirs," Cassian said simply. "And the magic that once protected them becomes their curse." The torches flickered. Somewhere deep above, a distant crash echoed, as if the manor itself had heard his words and awakened in anger. Draco and Hermione exchanged a look. Whatever was happening in Malfoy Manor was no haunting. It was a reckoning, and it had only just begun. The crash that thundered through the halls above made the dust tremble on the vault floor. Hermione's heart pounded. For a moment, even the torches seemed to shrink, their light retreating into themselves. Draco moved first, his voice tense. "That came from the West Wing." "The one with your mother's chambers," Hermione said quickly. He nodded, jaw set. "Come on." They left the vault, the iron door sealing itself behind them with a clang that echoed like a heartbeat. The corridors seemed darker now, the air dense with the faint hum of old magic. Every painting they passed followed them with watchful eyes. Some whispered words Hermione couldn't catch, fragments of Latin, fragments of warning. When they reached the West Wing, the door to Narcissa Malfoy's room stood open for the first time. A cold wind blew out of it, carrying the smell of damp earth. Hermione raised her wand, light spilling into the room, and gasped. Everything inside had been overturned. The furniture was shattered, the drapes torn. A massive crack ran across the wall from floor to ceiling, and from that crack seeped a faint greenish light, like the sickly glow of phosphorus. Draco stepped forward, shoulders stiff. "This room was locked. I've tried every counter-curse I know." "It wasn't you," Hermione murmured. "The curse is expanding. The house is breaking itself open." The air vibrated suddenly, and a low hum began to rise from the walls. Words, not in any language Hermione knew, pulsed from the crack, rhythmic and dark. She turned to Draco sharply. "Get back!" But before either could move, the light flared. The crack widened, and for a heartbeat the world went white. Hermione felt herself falling, spinning, dragged through something that wasn't quite space or time. Then, just as suddenly, she landed hard on cold marble. The glow was gone. The room was gone. She was standing in the grand hall of Malfoy Manor, except it wasn't the same. The tapestries were new, vibrant. Candles burned in silver sconces. The air smelled of perfume and firewood. Voices murmured somewhere nearby. "Granger." Draco's voice came from behind her, disbelieving. She turned. He was there, but he looked as dazed as she felt. "What just happened?" he asked. Hermione swallowed. "I think we've been pulled into the Manor's memory. The curse is forcing us to witness something from the past." Before Draco could reply, a group of figures entered the hall. Wizards and witches in fine robes, speaking in low tones. None of them seemed to notice the two intruders. Hermione recognized one of the faces, from portraits and history books. Cassian Malfoy, the man from the vault, alive and proud, silver hair gleaming beneath the chandelier. And beside him, another figure, tall, hooded and unmistakably old. The air around him shimmered faintly, heavy with the kind of power that pressed on the lungs. Salazar Slytherin himself. Hermione's breath caught. Draco's eyes widened. "That's... I know," she whispered. "Don't speak. They can't see us. This is a memory spell, not a projection." Cassian was speaking now, voice echoing through the hall. "My lord, the foundation stone is complete. The house will stand for generations." Slytherin's voice was soft, but carried like wind through a tunnel. "And the Keeper understands the price?" Cassian bowed. "My blood and my heir's blood, bound to the magic. As long as your house stands, so shall we." Slytherin nodded, eyes glinting like a serpent's. "Then let it be so. But remember, Cassian, when the house forgets, it hungers, and when it hungers, it devours." He raised his wand and drew a sigil in the air, the same serpent and rose Hermione had seen on the crest. Green fire blazed around the walls, sinking into the stone. The air shuddered, alive with power. Then, abruptly, everything froze. The figures, the light, even the fire, all suspended like a painting half finished. Hermione turned in slow realization. This is the origin, the moment the curse was born. Draco looked at her, voice low, and we're trapped inside it. The sound came before the fear, a faint whispering, the same words they'd heard in the chamber below. Blood remembers what mind forgets. Hermione felt the world tilt again, the hall melting like wax. The memory dissolved, colors bleeding away until all that remained was darkness. When her vision cleared, they were back, in Narcissa's ruined chamber. The crack had vanished, the green glow gone, but the air still trembled faintly with leftover magic. Draco staggered slightly, catching himself on a broken chair. What? What was that? Why would the curse show us that? Because it's not just a curse, Hermione said, voice hushed. It's a reminder. The spell wants you to remember the pact, to renew it. Draco's face hardened. I won't make any deal with Slytherin's ghost. You might not have a choice, she said. If you don't, the curse will consume everything and everyone connected to this place. He looked around the room, the wreckage of his mother's life scattered like bones. For the first time, she saw something raw flicker in his expression. Not arrogance, not defiance, but grief. I'm tired of this house, he said quietly. All my life, it's been a mausoleum pretending to be a home. Hermione's voice softened. Then let's free it, together. He met her gaze. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he nodded once. The book, it started this. If it appeared again, it must be the key to ending it. They left the West Wing, moving quickly through the dim corridors. The manor was silent now, but not peacefully so. The kind of silence that came before a storm. When they reached the hidden chamber, the door opened on its own. The book was waiting. Its cover pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. Hermione raised her wand. All right, she whispered. Let's see what you really are. She cast a revealing charm, and the book opened by itself. The pages filled with green flame, forming words of shifting light. They weren't written in ink, but in living magic. To renew the Keeper's bond, two must stand where the first blood was spilled. One born of the house, one born of the light. Together, they must choose memory or mercy. Hermione read the words aloud, and the air seemed to thicken. Memory or mercy, Draco repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. What does that mean? She didn't answer. Her mind raced. If Slytherin's spell was about preserving power through memory, then mercy could mean release, breaking the cycle entirely. But both options would come at a cost. The house would not allow both its power and its freedom. Hermione closed the book, her expression grim. Whatever happens, it has to end at the heart of the manor, wherever Cassian made that pact. Draco nodded. The foundations, beneath the East Wing. Then we go there, she said. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, shaking the windows. As they walked, the manor seemed to shift again. Corridors lengthening, staircases twisting. Shadows gathered at the edges of the walls, moving as though alive. Hermione tightened her grip on her wand. Draco moved beside her, voice low but steady. You know, Granger, when I wrote to you, I didn't expect you'd actually come. She glanced at him. And yet, here I am. He gave a faint, humorless smile. You always did like proving me wrong. Someone has to, she said. And for the first time that night, something like warmth flickered between them. But it was brief, because as they reached the base of the East Wing staircase, the shadows solidified. A figure stepped out, translucent, robed and cold. Cassian Malfoy. Only this time, he wasn't confined to a portrait, and his eyes, once calm, burned with spectral fire. You should not have woken the house, the ghost said softly. It remembers everything. And with that, the doors slammed shut behind them. The air turned icy the moment the doors sealed. Hermione's breath misted in the dim torchlight as Cassian Malfoy's ghost advanced, his movements slow but deliberate, like a tide rolling in. The faint green glow of his form pulsed in rhythm with the trembling walls. Draco instinctively stepped in front of Hermione, wand raised. "Stay back." Cassian tilted his head, studying his descendant with a strange mixture of curiosity and disdain. Bravery in a Malfoy. How novel. Draco's jaw tightened. "You're a ghost clinging to a curse. You've no right to judge anyone." Cassian smiled faintly, a thin, cold curve. "You misunderstand me. I am not bound here by choice. I am the last echo of the Keeper's promise, the oath your line swore and forgot." Hermione stepped forward, her own wand steady. "If the curse is your doing, then you can help us end it." Cassian turned his gaze on her, his eyes like pale moons. "End it," he repeated, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Foolish girl, there is no end. The magic that sustains this house runs deeper than stone or blood. It was woven into the foundation by Salazar himself. To sever it would unravel everything it has ever touched." Draco took a slow step closer. "Then why summon us? Why all this haunting, this chaos? What does the curse want?" "The house remembers," Cassian said simply. "It remembers the betrayal." Hermione's brow furrowed. "Betrayal?" Cassian's expression flickered, a flash of anguish crossing his face. "A keeper once broke the pact, tried to claim the house's magic for himself. The bond was shattered, and with it, the harmony between the blood and the stone. Since then, the manor has starved, feeding on grief, anger, and guilt. That is the only sustenance left to it." Draco's hand clenched around his wand. "You mean it feeds on my family's misery?" "Yes, and yours most of all," Cassian said softly. "Because you are the last." A heavy silence filled the air. Hermione's mind raced. Every curse had a source, and every spell, no matter how ancient, had a flaw. She could sense that Cassian was bound by the curse itself, unable to act freely. "Then tell us how to fix it," she said. "If the house feeds on pain, there must be a way to starve it, to restore the balance." Cassian regarded her with something almost like pity. "You think compassion can break what centuries of ambition have built? You are brave, Gryffindor witch, but this house was not made for mercy." Draco's voice cut through the chill. "Then maybe it's time it learned." For a moment, the ghost's expression softened. Then the light in his eyes dimmed, and his form began to fade. "Find the heart of the house," he whispered, voice barely audible. "But beware, the past will not surrender quietly." With a final flicker, he vanished, leaving only silence and the echo of his last words. Hermione lowered her wand slowly. "The heart of the house," she repeated. "He means the original foundation chamber, the place where Slytherin cast the first spell." Draco exhaled, tension still taut in his posture. "That's beneath the east wing. My father always said the stonework there was older than the manor itself." "Then that's where we'll find the core of the curse." They pushed through the heavy doors, which creaked open grudgingly. The corridors were darker now, the walls trembling faintly as if breathing. The portraits they passed turned their faces away. As they descended deeper into the manor, Hermione could feel the pull of the magic, not just around them, but inside her, tugging at her thoughts. It was ancient, deliberate, and lonely. At last they reached the lowest level, a corridor of black stone lined with serpent carvings. The air shimmered faintly with green mist. Draco stopped before a pair of massive stone doors, engraved with runes that pulsed faintly, as if alive. "This is it," he said quietly. Hermione raised her wand, murmuring a detection charm. Golden threads of light wove through the runes, revealing layers of enchantment. The spellworks tangled with blood wards. They'll only open for you. Draco hesitated, then pressed his hand to the center rune. The stone shuddered, then slowly parted, releasing a gust of stale, cold air. Inside was a vast circular chamber. At its center stood an ancient altar carved from the same marble as the manor's foundations. Faint light streamed from cracks in the ceiling, illuminating the sigil of a serpent encircling a rose. Slytherin's mark. Hermione's steps echoed softly as she approached. "This is where it began," she murmured. "The spell was cast here, and it's been feeding ever since." Draco joined her, his face pale in the dim light. "What now?" The inscription from the book said 2 must stand. "One of the house, one of the light," she said. "That's us." The curse was built on division. Pure blood against Muggleborn, legacy against choice. If it feeds on that, then unity is the counterspell. He gave a short, incredulous laugh. "Unity? You think my family's curse can be undone by teamwork?" Hermione's eyes met his, steady and bright. "Not teamwork, trust." He opened his mouth to argue, but something in her expression silenced him. She extended her hand. After a long pause, he took it. Their joined hands glowed faintly, gold and green lights swirling together, sinking into the altar's sigil. The ground beneath them trembled. The serpent carved into the stone seemed to writhe to life. A voice filled the chamber, deep, resonant, ancient. "Blood and light, bound in balance. Choose." Draco and Hermione exchanged a startled glance. "Choose what?" Hermione asked aloud. "Memory or mercy?" The choice from the book. Hermione's pulse quickened. "If we choose memory, the house's power remains, and the curse stays. Mercy means freedom, but the manor's magic dies with it." Draco's grip tightened around her hand. "If we choose mercy, my family's legacy ends." Hermione met his gaze. "If you choose memory, the suffering continues." The voice pressed again, more insistent now. "Choose." Draco's jaw set, conflict flickering in his eyes, pride warring with exhaustion, history against hope. "All my life, this house has defined who I am," he said quietly. "Every stone, every whisper, it's all I've ever known. But maybe that's the problem." He looked at her then, really looked at her. The witch who had once been his rival, now standing beside him at the edge of everything. "Mercy," he said. "We choose mercy." The altar blazed with light. A wave of magic surged through the room, wild and beautiful, tearing through the air like a storm. Hermione felt warmth rush up her arm, through her chest, her very heartbeat syncing with the pulse of the spell. The serpent on the altar shattered, scattering into motes of green and gold. The voice spoke one last time, softer now. "So be it." And then, silence. The tremors ceased. The air grew still. Hermione blinked, visions swimming as the light faded. When it cleared, the chamber was empty. The sigil was gone, the walls smooth and bare. Draco stood beside her, breathing hard, his expression unreadable. "Is it over?" She listened, to the quiet, to the hum of the house above them. It was different now. Not angry, not grieving, just still. "Yes," she said finally. "It's over." When they emerged from the depths, dawn was breaking. Soft light streamed through the high windows of the manor. The dust had settled. The shadows no longer stirred. Draco stopped in the entry hall, gazing up at the ceiling where sunlight touched the marble. "I've never seen it look like this," he said. Hermione smiled faintly. "Maybe it's just the first time you've really looked." He turned to her, the corners of his mouth lifting. "You're insufferable, you know that? Old habits die hard." They stood there for a long moment, the silence between them no longer heavy, but peaceful. Then Draco said softly, "Thank you, Hermione." She met his gaze, eyes warm. "You're welcome, Draco." Outside, the first light of morning spilled over the manor's white stone, and for the first time in generations, the house of Malfoy stood unshackled, no longer haunted, but reborn. And somewhere in the far distance, faint and almost impossible to hear, a phoenix cried. Days passed before either of them dared to speak of what had happened beneath Malfoy Manor. The magic had left a deep stillness in its wake, a silence that wasn't empty but watchful, as if the very walls were listening. The air no longer hummed with restless power, yet the house felt different now, alive in a gentler way. Hermione remained at the manor longer than she had planned. She told herself it was to make sure the curse had truly broken, to document the magical effects for the ministry's archives. But in truth, part of her wasn't ready to leave. The days were filled with work. Every morning she walked through the corridors with her wand drawn, tracing the remnants of magic that lingered like faint threads in the air. Every evening she wrote her observations by the fire in the study, her quills scratching quietly while rain pattered against the windows. Draco rarely interrupted her. He had his own ghosts to confront. Hermione saw him often, sometimes repairing the cracked walls with his wand, sometimes standing in the gardens where the old fountain had begun to flow again. He was distant, thoughtful, but there was a change in him. The bitterness that once clung to his words had softened, replaced by something quieter. It was on the fifth evening, as twilight painted the manor in shades of silver and blue, that he came to her study. "You're still here," he said, leaning against the doorway. Hermione looked up from her notes. "I told you, I need to ensure the curse doesn't reform. These enchantments were centuries old. They won't fade overnight." He smiled faintly. "That's not what I meant." She set down her quill, meeting his gaze. "You thought I'd run off the moment it was over." He shrugged, crossing the room to the window. "People usually do. Malfoy Manor isn't exactly a place one lingers. Maybe it just needs better company." He glanced at her, caught off guard by the ease in her tone. The tension between them had changed, not gone, but transformed into something deeper, something neither quite knew how to name. Outside, the last of the sun dipped below the hills, and for a moment they both watched in silence. "Do you remember," Hermione said after a while, "what the curse's voice said before it ended? Blood and light bound in balance." He nodded. "How could I forget? It nearly tore the house apart." "I've been thinking," she continued slowly. "Perhaps that wasn't just the spell's key. Maybe it was its message. The founders always worked in pairs. Opposites meant to balance each other. Slytherin created this spell alone, and that imbalance was what doomed it." Draco turned from the window, his expression thoughtful. "And you think we were meant to correct it?" "I think," she said, "that by standing together, by choosing mercy over power, we did what Slytherin never could. We balanced it." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "So, the Gryffindor and the Slytherin saved the day. History would have a fit." She laughed softly, and for the first time since she'd arrived, the sound didn't echo hollowly in the vast room. The following morning dawned bright and clear, a rare thing in Wiltshire. Hermione stepped out into the gardens to find the sky a flawless blue, the air carrying the scent of wet grass and lavender. The fountain sparkled again, its mermaid whole and singing softly. She found Draco near the rose archway, his sleeves rolled up as he pruned the overgrown vines. It was strange, she thought, how natural he looked here now. Not as the proud heir of a cursed house, but as a man rebuilding something that might finally belong to him. "You're working before breakfast?" she asked lightly. He gave her a sidelong glance. "It's either this or watch the portraits argue about the new decor." Hermione smiled. "I suppose the house really is awake again." He nodded, his expression softening. "It's quieter now, peaceful even. For the first time in my life, I think it's forgiving." The words lingered in the air, and Hermione felt a tug in her chest. Forgiving. That was what they all had needed. The house, him, perhaps even herself. As the days passed, they settled into an odd rhythm. They ate breakfast together, sometimes in silence, sometimes sharing small, cautious conversations. Hermione discovered Draco had a sharp, dry humor when he allowed himself to use it, and that his wit, once cruel, had become clever instead. One afternoon, they stood side by side in the library, shelves stretching endlessly around them. The sunlight spilled across the carpet, illuminating dust motes like floating stars. "Do you ever miss Hogwarts?" Hermione asked, tracing the spine of a weathered tome. He considered for a moment. "Sometimes. Mostly the quiet corners, the ones where no one expected anything of me." She smiled faintly. "I used to hide in the library for the same reason, to escape expectations." "Except you were good at meeting them," he said, half amused. "I had to be," she replied softly. "It was the only way to be seen for what I was, not what they thought I wasn't." He looked at her then, really looked, and something unspoken passed between them, fragile and uncertain, but undeniably real. Later that evening, Hermione sat by the fire, a book open in her lap. The manor was quiet, save for the soft crackle of flames. Draco entered silently, 2 cups of tea in his hands. He set one on the table beside her. "Chamomile. I remember you used to drink it in the common room, late nights studying." She blinked, surprised. "You remember that?" A small shrug. "I noticed more than I admitted." Their eyes met, and for a long moment the world outside seemed to fade. The air between them felt charged, not with magic this time, but something gentler, more human. Hermione looked away first, her cheeks warm. "Thank you," she murmured, taking the cup. He sat across from her, the firelight flickering across his features. "You'll leave soon?" he said quietly. "I'll have to," she admitted. "There'll be reports to file, and I'm sure the ministry will want an account. They always do." Draco nodded, though the faint shadow in his eyes betrayed disappointment. "Right. The ministry loves paperwork," she smiled. "And you still hate it." "I'm consistent," he said, his tone teasing but soft. They fell silent again. The flames danced between them, painting the walls with shifting gold. After a while, Hermione closed her book and looked up. "When the ministry does come, they'll find the house cleansed. The curse is gone. You'll be free to live here, or leave if you wish." Draco's expression was unreadable. "Leave? And go where?" Anywhere, she said simply. You could start over. You're not bound here anymore. He leaned back in his chair, eyes on the fire. Perhaps, but maybe the house isn't the only thing I want to rebuild. Hermione's heart skipped, though she didn't speak. His tone wasn't flirtatious. It was honest, thoughtful, almost uncertain. Outside, the wind shifted, rattling the ivy against the window. Draco turned to her then, and his voice, when it came, was quieter still. You once saved me from a curse I didn't understand, and you've done it again. She met his gaze. You saved yourself, Draco. I only reminded you that you could. Something flickered in his eyes. Gratitude, maybe, or something deeper. Then he stood, offering her a hand. Come, he said. There's something you should see. Curious, she followed him through the corridors until they reached the great hall. The moon shone through the tall windows, illuminating the marble floor. But it wasn't the light that caught her breath. It was what he'd done. The serpent and rose crest that once adorned the floor had been changed. The serpent was still there, but coiled now around a stem of ivy instead. Alive, growing, green. It seemed right, he said quietly. Something that remembers what it was, but chooses to grow anyway. Hermione smiled, her chest tight with unspoken feeling. It's beautiful. He looked at her, and for once there was no wall between them. No house, no history, no ghosts. Just two people standing in the pale glow of a new beginning. And as the night deepened around them, the manor, for centuries a place of sorrow, felt at last like home. Autumn came quietly to Wiltshire, spreading soft gold across the manor grounds. The fields beyond the gates turned the colour of honey, and the air carried the scent of leaves and rain. The Malfoy estate, once a place of whispering shadows, now breathed in rhythm with the changing season. Hermione had meant to leave weeks ago. Her reports for the ministry were written and sent, her official duties completed. But each time she packed her suitcase, something, the faint hum of magic still lingering in the house, or perhaps the unspoken pull in Draco's eyes, held her there a little longer. She told herself she was simply being thorough. The curse had been ancient, complex. A prudent witch did not rush away from the remnants of such magic. Yet she knew the truth. She stayed because the manor no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a heartbeat. Draco was changing too. The old arrogance had faded, replaced by a quiet focus. He worked every day, sometimes in the gardens, sometimes in the library, restoring what the curse had broken. When he wasn't casting repair charms, he read thick volumes on history, architecture, and even a few on magical flora. It was one such morning when Hermione found him in the greenhouse behind the manor. The glass panes glistened with dew, the air within warm and fragrant with the scent of soil and jasmine. He was bent over a table of seedlings, sleeves rolled up, one tip glowing faintly as he coaxed a sprig of aconite to bloom. I never thought I'd see the day, Hermione said from the doorway. Draco Malfoy, gardener. He glanced up, smirking faintly. Don't mock genius, Granger. I've decided to cultivate the dangerous ones first. Seems appropriate. Of course you would. She stepped closer, her gaze drifting over the rows of carefully labelled pots. Some were common herbs, dittany, valerian, but others were rare, nearly extinct species she hadn't seen since Hogwarts. You've collected half a potioneer's dream in here. Credit where it's due, he said, tapping the soil with his wand. You were the one who mentioned that aconite absorbs residual dark magic. I thought I'd see if it worked on a house." Hermione smiled. "Does it?" He straightened, brushing dirt from his hands. "It seems calmer, or maybe I am." Their eyes met briefly before she turned to a nearby window where ivy curled up the glass in thin green ribbons. "I think both," she said quietly. Outside, rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier, drumming against the panes. They lingered there, the quiet between them comfortable. Draco was the first to speak again. "I've been thinking about what you said before, about balance, blood and light." Hermione looked at him. "What about it?" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "For years, I hated what my family stood for. Purity, legacy, all of it. But I also hated what came after. The pity, the judgment. I thought if I rebuilt the manor, I could rebuild the Malfoy name. But maybe balance means letting go of both pride and shame." Hermione tilted her head slightly. "That sounds a lot like wisdom." He gave a small, rueful laugh. "Don't tell anyone." The moment lightened, but something warm lingered beneath the teasing, a shared understanding born not from words, but from the simple fact that they had survived something ancient together. When the rain eased, they returned to the house. A faint mist hung in the corridors, softening the edges of the marble halls. Hermione paused near the great staircase, noticing that the portraits had grown quieter too. Some of the older ancestors even nodded politely as she passed. Draco followed her gaze. "They approve of you, you know. That's a first." Hermione laughed softly. "Imagine that. A Muggle-born witch welcomed by Malfoy ancestors. Perhaps the world really is changing." He studied her for a long moment, something thoughtful flickering in his expression. "You changed it," he said. Before she could reply, an echoing chime rang through the house, a visitor at the front gates. Draco frowned. "No one comes here uninvited." Hermione followed him to the entrance hall. Through the tall windows, she could see a small group approaching. 3 figures in ministry robes, their wands visible at their sides. The leader, a tall witch with sharp eyes and streaks of silver in her hair, raised her hand in greeting. "Inspector Delaney," Hermione murmured. "Magical law enforcement. Friends of yours?" "Not exactly," she exhaled. "They're here to verify the closure report, standard procedure after a major curse." Draco's expression tightened, but he stepped back as the doors opened. Delaney entered first, her eyes scanning the hall with professional suspicion. "Malfoy," she said curtly, then turned to Hermione. "Granger, I assume you're satisfied with your investigation." "Yes," Hermione said evenly. "The curse was neutralized weeks ago. The manor poses no magical threat." Delaney's gaze flicked toward Draco. "We'll see about that." Hermione bristled at the tone, but Draco remained calm. "You're welcome to inspect anything you like. The house has nothing to hide." For the next hour, the inspectors examined the manor from top to bottom, their detection spells sweeping through rooms and corridors, flickering over walls. Hermione followed, answering their questions patiently. Draco trailed behind, his face impassive, though his eyes betrayed his unease. When at last they returned to the hall, Delaney lowered her wand. "No trace of residual dark magic," she said. "Impressive work, Granger. The Ministry will approve the report." Then her gaze shifted again to Draco. "But understand this, Malfoy. Curses leave shadows. If there's any resurgence, any sign of instability, The Ministry will reclaim the property. Draco's jaw tightened. Understood. When the inspectors had gone, Hermione turned to him. Don't let her get to you. She's just doing her job. I know, he said quietly. But it's strange. The curse is gone. The house is at peace. And still, I'm the one they expect to fall back into darkness. Then prove them wrong, she said simply. His gaze softened. That's easier said than done. Most things worth doing are. They stood there for a moment longer before he gave a faint smile. You're not planning to leave tonight, are you? She shook her head. Not yet. Good. I'll have the house elf prepare dinner. The evening passed quietly. They ate in the restored dining hall, candles flickering between them. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, whispering through the open windows like an old song. Afterward, Hermione lingered by the fire, while Draco poured 2 glasses of elf-made wine. The flames painted shifting patterns on the marble floor. He handed her one of the glasses, his fingers brushing hers briefly. To the end of curses, he said. She smiled. And the beginning of something better. They drank in silence. The night deepened around them, soft and silver. Hermione watched the flames dance, her thoughts drifting. For so long she had defined her life by duty, to justice, to reason, to the Ministry. Yet here, in this once accursed house, she felt something she hadn't known she missed. Stillness. Draco spoke suddenly, his voice low. You could stay, you know. The manor's large enough, and the library's practically begging for someone to reorganize it. Hermione looked up, caught between surprise and something dangerously close to hope. I thought you wanted solitude, she said. I did, he admitted, until I realized solitude isn't the same as peace. Her breath caught slightly. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence with warmth. I'll think about it, she said softly. He smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes. That's all I ask. Outside, the last of the autumn leaves drifted across the moonlit lawns. Inside, the manor held its breath, listening, as if the very stones knew that something long withered had begun to grow again. And in that quiet, 2 hearts, once divided by history, began, cautiously, tenderly, to find their rhythm. Winter crept over Wiltshire like a whisper. Frost laced the trees beyond the manor grounds, and the mornings were white with breath and silence. Inside, the house had grown warmer, not by firelight alone, but by something softer, something unspoken that wove between its new inhabitants. Hermione found herself waking earlier now, her mornings filled with quiet rituals. She would walk the corridors before sunrise, her wand light, dim and golden, tracing the way shadows softened against the marble walls. The manor no longer felt haunted. It felt watchful, protective, as if remembering her steps. Sometimes she caught Draco watching her from across a room, not with the cold curiosity of old, but with a kind of quiet awareness. He had changed since that night beneath the foundations. The edges of his voice had softened, and though his wit remained sharp, it was laced with warmth instead of mockery. They had fallen into a rhythm, one that neither of them spoke of, but both had come to rely on. Breakfasts by the east windows, where the sunlight poured through the frost. Afternoons spent cataloguing ancient tomes in the library, her notes scattered across the floor while he sorted through dusty shelves. Evenings filled with the low hum of conversation and the steady crackle of the hearth. Still, Beneath the peace, something restless stirred. The curse had been broken, but the Manor's heart still pulsed faintly with old magic. Not dangerous, but incomplete. Hermione could sense it when she touched the walls or walked the halls at night. A whisper just out of reach, a presence half asleep. One snow-laden evening, while she sat by the fire reading through a worn copy of Foundations of Early Magical Architecture, Draco entered the room carrying a small wooden box. He set it down beside her. "I found this hidden in one of the East Wing closets. It belonged to my mother." Hermione closed her book carefully. The box was elegant, carved from rosewood, the Malfoy crest etched faintly into its lid. When Draco opened it, the scent of jasmine and old parchment rose into the air. Inside were letters, dozens of them, bound in pale green ribbon. Narcissa's handwriting was delicate, elegant, and unmistakably loving. "They're for you?" Hermione asked quietly. He shook his head. "For my father. She must have hidden them after he died." He lifted one, unfolding it carefully. His mother's words shimmered faintly in the firelight. "My dearest Lucius, the house grows colder without you. The portraits whisper, and I think sometimes they know more than we ever did." Draco's fingers tightened around the parchment. She must have felt it, the curse's shadow, even before it turned. Hermione nodded, her heart twisting. "She stayed to protect it, didn't she? To protect you." He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was soft. "She used to tell me the Manor wasn't evil, only lonely. I never believed her, not until now." He looked up at her then, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "You changed that, Granger. You brought it, and me, back to life." Hermione felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Draco." He smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You can't deny it. The Manor listens to you. It trusts you." "Perhaps because I listened first." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the soft whisper of falling snow beyond the window. Hermione reached out and brushed her fingers over the edge of the letter. "She loved deeply," she said softly, "and she endured more than anyone realized. You're a reflection of that strength, Draco." He met her gaze, steady, searching, and for a fleeting moment, the years of distance between them seemed to vanish. The rivalry, the bitterness, the memories of war, all faded into the quiet hum of something fragile and real. Then, as if breaking the spell, he cleared his throat and placed the letter back in the box. "You're impossible, you know, always finding the good in things that shouldn't have any." "Someone has to balance your cynicism," she said lightly. He laughed, a genuine sound, rare and low, and for a moment the room felt brighter. That night, after he'd gone to his study, Hermione lingered by the fire, her thoughts tangled between reason and feeling. She told herself that what she felt was gratitude, perhaps friendship. But deep down, she knew it was more. Something unlooked for, undesired, and yet as inevitable as the pull of the tide. In the days that followed, the snow deepened. The world outside grew white and silent, isolating the Manor in a cocoon of cold. Yet inside, life went on. The portraits, once sullen, began to speak again, not with curses or laments, but with faint curiosity about the living. Hermione often caught one elderly witch's portrait, watching her fondly. "You remind me of the first Mistress Malfoy," the portrait said one afternoon as Hermione passed. "She too had a spine of iron and a heart too soft for her own good. Hermione smiled at that, unsure whether to feel flattered or wary. Draco, meanwhile, had taken to reading in the evenings beside her, both of them tucked into the old sitting room with its warm lamplight and velvet chairs. Sometimes they read in silence. Sometimes they spoke of trivial things, the ministry, old classmates, books. But slowly, their words began to circle closer to what neither dared name. One night, as a blizzard howled beyond the windows, Hermione looked up from her book to find Draco watching her. "What is it?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then said, "When you first came here, I thought the manor would consume you. I thought it would twist you like it did everyone else. But you didn't bend. You made it yield." "Maybe it wasn't about yielding," she said. "Maybe it was about forgiving." His expression softened. "Do you forgive me?" The question startled her. For what? For the way I was. For what I said, what I did. His voice was quiet, steady, but she could hear the weight beneath it. "You have every reason not to." Hermione closed her book and set it aside. "I forgave you years ago," she said simply. "You were a boy taught to hate things you didn't understand, but you're not that person anymore." He looked away, his jaw tight, but when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I want to be worthy of that." Hermione's chest tightened. "You already are." The wind roared outside, but inside the world was still. Neither spoke for a long time. Then, slowly, Draco stood crossing the space between them. He knelt beside her chair, the firelight casting gold through his hair, and said quietly, "I never thanked you properly for saving this house, for saving me." Her breath caught. "You don't have to." "I do," he said, his gaze holding hers, "because for the first time, I don't feel cursed." Hermione didn't know which of them moved first, only that the moment between them closed like the space between breaths, brief, infinite. The world narrowed to warmth and nearness, the faint scent of parchment and fire. Then he rose abruptly, stepping back. "I should check the wards," he said quickly. "The snowstorm might disturb them." And just like that, he was gone. Hermione sat motionless, heart pounding, the echo of something unsaid hanging in the room. Outside, snow drifted against the windows, soft and endless. Inside, in the great heart of Malfoy Manor, the air hummed faintly, not with curses or ghosts, but with something new, something waiting. When morning came, the world lay silent under a heavy quilt of snow. Every tree branch bowed beneath its weight, every window glimmered with frost. Hermione awoke to a pale dawn and the quiet creak of the manor settling around her. For a few moments she lay still, listening to the wind pressing softly against the panes, before rising and wrapping herself in her cloak. The corridors were cold, her breath visible in the air. As she walked, the portraits murmured sleepily, half buried in their own dreams. The manor had grown gentler in recent months, its magic subdued, its shadows tame. But in winter's hush, it felt older again, like the echo of a story long remembered. She found Draco in the study, standing near the tall windows with his back to her. The light outlined him sharply, silver hair bright against the dim room, black robes blending with the dark wood. A cup of untouched tea steamed on the table beside him. "You were up early," she said softly. He didn't turn. "Couldn't sleep. The storm kept me awake." Hermione stepped closer. "Is something wrong?" He shook his head, but his posture was tense. "No, just thinking." She waited, patient. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "It's strange. For months now, I've felt the house breathing again, alive, content. But last night, it felt different, as if something stirred." Hermione frowned. "You think the curse is returning?" "No," he said quickly. "Not that. It's something else. Older, quieter, like a whisper beneath the floorboards." She moved to his side, gazing out at the snow-covered grounds. "Maybe it's just the wind." He gave a humorless smile. "You and I both know better than that." Hermione nodded slowly. "Then we'll find out what it is." They began their inspection that morning, moving through each floor with methodical care. The manor was vast, and though they had explored nearly every part of it before, the house always seemed to shift slightly. Doors leading to unexpected places, corridors subtly changing direction. Its magic was restless, but no longer malevolent. In the northern wing, near a seldom-used hallway lined with tapestries of silver thread, Hermione paused. A faint hum touched her ears. Not sound exactly, but vibration, like a note held just beyond hearing. "Do you feel that?" she asked. Draco stopped beside her, frowning. "Yes, it's coming from behind the wall." Hermione traced her wand along the tapestry, revealing a shimmer of concealed magic. "There's a door here, hidden by a concealment charm." Draco lifted his wand and muttered, "Finite." The wall shivered. The tapestry dissolved into dust, revealing a narrow door of dark oak, its handle carved in the shape of a serpent biting its tail. "Another secret room," Hermione murmured. "Your family certainly loved their mysteries." "I'm beginning to think they just liked hiding things from each other," he replied dryly. The door creaked open, revealing a spiral staircase descending into shadow. The air was cool and carried the scent of earth and stone. Hermione conjured a sphere of light and started downward. The steps ended in a small chamber, circular and plain. No runes, no sigils, no signs of Slytherin's influence. At its center stood a single pedestal of marble, upon which rested a shallow silver bowl filled with clear water. Hermione approached cautiously. "A scrying basin," she said. "But this is ancient, older than the curse itself." Draco joined her. "My family never mentioned it." "They probably didn't know it existed." She touched the rim lightly with her wand. The water rippled, glowing faintly. A vision shimmered into view, not an image, but a reflection that was not her own. She saw a woman, young, pale, with eyes like moonlight and hair dark as ink. She wore robes embroidered with serpents, and her expression was calm, almost sorrowful. "Who is she?" Draco asked quietly. Before Hermione could answer, the figure in the water spoke, her voice soft and echoing, as if carried from far away. "To those who awaken the house, know that balance must be renewed not once, but twice. Blood and light may heal the walls, but heart must heal the soul." The vision flickered, the water trembling. "Wait!" Hermione called. "What does that mean?" But the image dissolved, leaving only ripples fading into stillness. Draco stared at the basin. "Heart must heal the soul," he repeated. "That sounds ominous." "Or hopeful," Hermione said, though her brow furrowed. The house's magic was tied to emotion as much as blood. Perhaps there's still one thread left, something unresolved. He turned to her, his eyes unreadable. "And how do you suppose we heal a soul, Granger?" She hesitated. "By understanding what still binds it, by finding what's missing." They spent the rest of the day searching for clues. In the library, Hermione combed through old journals and scrolls, while Draco inspected the portraits for any mention of the woman in the basin. It was near dusk when he found something. Hidden behind a row of alchemy texts was a small leather-bound book, its pages yellowed, the writing elegant and faded. "It's Cassian's," Draco said, handing it to her. "The first keeper." Hermione opened it carefully. The entries were brief but deliberate, records of the pact, of the spells woven into the manor's foundations. Near the final pages, she found one note written in hurried script. "Salazar warned me. Power without compassion decays. The house breathes my ambition, but not my heart. I fear it will remember only my pride." She read it aloud, then looked up at Draco. "Heart must heal the soul. It means the manor still remembers Cassian's guilt, his regret for what he created." Draco's voice was quiet, "And that memory has lingered here for centuries." Hermione closed the journal. "Then that's what we must do. Free him, not from the curse, but from himself." That night they returned to the hidden chamber. The basin glimmered faintly, reflecting the light of their wands. Hermione placed the journal beside it, and together they cast a summoning charm. A whisper rose from the water, faint, mournful. The image of Cassian Malfoy appeared, no longer proud but weary, his ghostly eyes dimmed by centuries of remorse. "You have come," he said softly. Hermione stepped forward. "Cassian, your house is free. The curse is broken, but your soul is still bound. You must let go." He looked at her, then at Draco. The sins of ambition do not fade easily. Draco met his gaze evenly. "You sought to preserve your legacy. I understand that, but it's time to let it rest. The manor no longer needs your memory. It needs peace." Cassian's expression softened. "And you, my heir, do you have peace?" Draco hesitated, then said, "I'm learning." The ghost smiled faintly. "Then perhaps so can I." He placed a hand over his heart, and light began to spread from his chest, soft, silver, and pure. It filled the chamber, spilling across the walls, dissolving the shadows that had lingered for generations. When the light faded, Cassian was gone. Only the basin remained, still and silent. Hermione exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath. "It's over," she whispered. Draco's hand brushed hers lightly. "Truly, this time." They climbed back to the surface together, emerging into the great hall. The storm outside had ended, and moonlight poured through the high windows, flooding the room in silver. The manor's air felt different now, lighter, freer, as though it too had taken its first full breath in centuries. Hermione turned to him. "It's strange," she said softly. "Every curse we've broken has made this house more human." Draco smiled faintly. "Then perhaps it's not the only one being healed." For a heartbeat, the world was still, her eyes meeting his, the moonlight catching the faintest trace of warmth on his face. And somewhere deep within the manor, a soft sound stirred, not a whisper this time, but a sigh. Content, restful, whole. The thaw came late that year, slow and uncertain. It began with a faint drip of melting snow from the gutters, then the soft murmur of running water where the ice had once bound the streams. The manor's gardens, long buried in frost, began to stir. Shoots of green pressed through the dark soil, timid at first, then bold. Hermione watched it all from the library window. A book lay open before her, forgotten. The morning sunlight warmed the air, scattering through motes of dust that drifted like lazy fireflies. She had grown used to the quiet rhythm of life here, to mornings filled with study and afternoons spent in the greenhouse. And yet, lately, her thoughts were restless, as if something unseen was waiting beyond the peace they had built. Draco entered without a sound, as he often did now. He carried a bundle of parchments under one arm and a faint, thoughtful look in his eyes. "You've been here since dawn," he said. "The house told me." She smiled faintly. "Does it speak to you now?" "Sometimes." He shrugged, setting the parchments down. "It likes you better." Hermione turned from the window. "The Manor doesn't play favorites, Draco. It responds to intent. Perhaps it's beginning to trust you." He gave a quiet huff of laughter. "Then I've achieved what every Malfoy before me failed to do. Earn my own house's approval." "You've earned more than that," she said softly. Something flickered in his eyes, but before he could speak, a sudden noise interrupted them. A faint, resonant chime that seemed to come from the heart of the Manor. Hermione straightened. "What was that?" "The wards," he said, frowning. "Someone's crossing the boundary." She followed him to the entrance hall. The great doors swung open with a low groan, and in the sunlight beyond stood a lone figure. For a heartbeat, Hermione didn't recognize her. Then she did. The golden hair, the sharp, assessing eyes that had once scanned her essays for flaws. "Professor McGonagall," she breathed. The headmistress of Hogwarts inclined her head, her expression unreadable but kind. "Miss Granger," she said, then with a slight nod to Draco. "Mr. Malfoy." Draco straightened. "Headmistress." "I see the rumors are true," McGonagall said, stepping inside. "The Manor lives again." "Not as it once did," Draco said quietly. "It's changed." Her eyes softened as they swept over the hall. "As have you, it seems." Then she turned to Hermione. "I received your report on the curse. Impressive work, though I must admit I hoped this matter was behind you." "It is," Hermione said. "Or at least it was." McGonagall studied her for a long moment. "You look different. Older, perhaps, but steadier. It suits you." Hermione smiled faintly. "Thank you, Professor." The headmistress's gaze drifted toward the grand staircase. "This house was once a place of fear. It pleases me to see it filled with light again. However, there are matters I must discuss with you both, matters that reach beyond the walls of this estate." Draco exchanged a glance with Hermione. "What kind of matters?" McGonagall drew a folded parchment from her robes. "The Ministry has reopened its inquiry into the Founder's relics. Your discovery of the Slytherin sigils under this manor has raised interest. They wish to examine what remains of the original enchantments." Hermione's brow furrowed. "That's a terrible idea. The residual magic is delicate. Disturbing it could unbalance everything we've done here." "I know," McGonagall said. "That's why I came myself. The Minister values your expertise, Hermione. He's asked that you oversee the investigation." Draco's expression hardened. "Meaning the Ministry will trample through my home again?" McGonagall met his gaze. "Meaning you will have a voice this time, Mr. Malfoy. The Ministry cannot act without your consent. The past may have burdened your name, but it no longer defines it." Draco hesitated. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the old clock above the mantel. Finally, he said, "Then I agree, on one condition. Hermione leads it, and no one touches the foundations without her approval." McGonagall's mouth twitched, the faintest trace of a smile. "I expected nothing less." She departed soon after, leaving behind a sense of unease that lingered even as the sun climbed higher. Draco stood at the window long after she left, his hands clasped behind his back. "They'll come in droves," he said quietly. "Historians, curse breakers, ministry clerks, all eager to dissect what we built." Hermione joined him. "Then we'll make sure they respect it. The house may be old, but it's no one's relic." He turned toward her. "You say we, as if you're still staying." She met his gaze evenly. "Do you want me to leave?" His answer came without hesitation. "No." The word hung between them, simple and heavy. Outside, a breeze stirred the ivy that clung to the walls. For a moment, the manor seemed to breathe with them, as if listening. Later that evening, Hermione found herself wandering through the east wing, drawn by the faint glow of moonlight spilling across the floors. The manor felt restless again, not dangerous, but awake. Her hand brushed the wall as she walked, and beneath her fingertips the stone pulsed faintly with warmth. When she reached the great hall, Draco was there, seated on the marble steps beneath the enchanted chandelier. The light cast a halo around him, softening the sharp lines of his face. "You couldn't sleep either," she said. He shook his head. "The house feels alive tonight, more than usual." Hermione sat beside him. "Maybe it's the anticipation. It knows change is coming." He gave a quiet laugh. "I'm not sure I like that." "You'll survive," she teased. "I've done worse," he said, smiling faintly. Then, after a pause, his voice grew softer. "You know, I used to hate this place. Every wall, every corridor reminded me of something I wanted to forget. But now," he looked up at the ceiling, where the chandelier lights swayed gently. "Now, I can almost imagine it as home." "It is home," she said. "It always was. It just needed you to let it be." He turned toward her then, and the look in his eyes, quiet, searching, unsure, made her heart stutter. "Granger," he began, and she realized with a start that he hadn't called her that in weeks. "If I asked you to stay, really stay, would you?" The question stole her breath. "I don't know," she said after a long moment. "My work, the ministry." He interrupted softly. "You've done your part for the world 100 times over. Maybe it's time you did something for yourself." She looked at him, and in the flickering light, she saw not the boy she'd once known, but a man who had spent a lifetime learning to be better, and who somehow had found peace in the same place that had once imprisoned him. "I'll think about it," she said, and smiled, a small, real smile that made his eyes soften. They sat together in silence as the night deepened. Outside, the first blossoms of early spring stirred beneath the snow. Inside, the manor's heart beat steady and sure, the echoes of old ghosts fading into memory. When Hermione finally rose to leave, Draco caught her hand, just for an instant. "Good night," he said quietly. "Good night," she whispered. As she walked away, the house sighed, not in sorrow, but in contentment. And somewhere in the stillness, deep in its foundations, a soft pulse of magic stirred again. Not dark this time, but warm, alive, and waiting. Spring unfurled across the Wiltshire hills, slow and tender. The air turned fragrant with blooming hawthorn, and the fields around Malfoy Manor shimmered in soft green. The house, once a monument to silence, now breathed like something reborn. its halls warmed by sunlight, its portraits watchful but at ease. Hermione had intended to leave when the ministry's investigators arrived, but somehow the days lengthened into weeks, and she found herself still there, still wandering the ancient corridors that no longer frightened her. The manor was changing. So was she. The ministry team came and went, respectful but cautious. They examined the old wards, the foundations, the enchanted basin, and finally declared the site stable. The report would take months to finalize, but Hermione already knew what it would say. No residual dark magic detected. Still, she didn't leave. Not yet. Draco didn't ask her to stay, not in words. But the unspoken invitation hung between them. In the quiet breakfasts, the late-night walks through the garden, the comfortable silence of two people who had learned how to share space without needing to fill it. It was on one such evening, when the sun was melting behind the horizon and the sky bled into violet, that she found him standing by the newly restored fountain. Water spilled softly over marble, catching the last of the light. "You repaired it," she said, stepping closer. Draco looked up from where he was adjusting the spell that made the mermaid sing. It seemed fitting. You said once the manor needed to remember what peace felt like. Hermione smiled. You listened. I always listen, he said quietly. The wind stirred her hair, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and roses. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them was full of everything unsaid. The past, the fragile present, the possibilities of what might follow. Do you ever think, Hermione began slowly, that curses aren't always what they seem? That sometimes they're just lessons left unfinished? Draco's eyes met hers, silver catching the dying light. You think this house was teaching us something? Not just the house, she said. Maybe all of us. Maybe the things that haunt us are only trying to make us remember who we could become. He smiled faintly. That sounds like something Dumbledore would have said. Perhaps he was right more often than we like to admit. The mermaid's song rose softly behind them, a lilting melody that rippled through the air. Draco turned away, his gaze distant. I spent half my life running from this place, he said. Every room was a reminder of what I'd done, what my family had done. I thought if I rebuilt it, I could rewrite it. But that isn't how redemption works, is it? No, Hermione said gently. It isn't about rewriting the past. It's about making peace with it. He glanced at her, his voice low. And you've made peace with yours. Hermione hesitated, then nodded. I think I have, but it took coming here to realize it. For a while, they stood in silence. The sun slipped fully below the horizon, and lanterns flickered to life along the path. Draco turned then, his expression unreadable. Hermione, he said softly. Her name, not Granger. If peace is what this place offers, will you take it? Here, with me. Her breath caught. She saw in his eyes not the arrogance she once despised, nor the wounded pride she'd pitied, but something steadier, an earnestness that was both fragile and unguarded. I don't know what I'm meant to do next, she admitted. The ministry, my work, it's all I've ever known. Then perhaps it's time to know something else, he said. Something that's yours alone. Hermione looked at the fountain, at the light dancing on the water's surface, and felt the weight of the years between them, the war, the pain, the choices that had brought them here. When she met his gaze again, her voice was barely above a whisper. You're asking me to stay. He nodded. Yes. She closed her eyes briefly, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. I don't make decisions like this easily, she said, half smiling. I wouldn't expect you to. Then quietly she added, but I want to. Something in his expression softened, the tension easing from his shoulders. You always did have terrible timing. Better late than never, she said, and laughed softly, a sound so warm it made the air seem brighter. That night, the manor glowed. The chandeliers burned brighter, the hearths crackled with renewed life, and the portraits murmured approvingly as if they too understood what had shifted. Hermione moved through the halls as though walking through memory. She paused at the staircase where they had first spoken as equals, at the study where he'd set her tea beside her parchment, at the library where their hands had brushed over the same book. Each place held a fragment of something new, something quietly built from the ruins of what had been. When she reached the balcony overlooking the gardens, she found him there again. The moonlight painted the edges of his hair silver. It's beautiful tonight, she said. It's never been like this before, he replied. I think the house is happy. She smiled. Perhaps it's just reflecting you. He turned, eyes catching hers in the moonlight. Hermione, he said softly, do you ever regret coming here? Never. Even after everything this place held, especially because of it. He exhaled slowly, the faintest ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. You've turned Malfoy Manor into something I didn't think possible. What's that? A home. The word hung between them, fragile and real. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Hermione stepped closer, the night air cool around them. The moonlight shimmered on the marble, the air thick with quiet magic. Not the old kind that cursed and bound, but the kind that healed. When she spoke again, her voice trembled only slightly. It was never just the house that needed saving. Draco's hand brushed hers, tentative but certain. No, he said. It wasn't. They stood there until the stars wheeled high above them and the first light of dawn touched the horizon. The house around them slept peacefully, its long watch finally over. Inside, the ghosts were silent. The halls that had once whispered with sorrow now hummed with the low pulse of life, steady, strong, and whole. Hermione rested her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in years, she felt no weight of duty, no shadow of the past, only the quiet certainty of belonging. Beyond the gardens, a single rose bloomed where frost had once claimed the earth, its petals unfurling toward the light. And within the walls of Malfoy Manor, once cursed, once broken, love, unexpected and unlooked for, began to take root. Summer settled over Wiltshire like a long exhale. The days grew golden and slow, the air heavy with the scent of wildflowers and the low hum of bees that had returned to the manor gardens after years of silence. Malfoy Manor shimmered in the warmth, its white stone glowing softly beneath the sunlight. The fountain sang from morning to dusk, its music mingling with the soft rustle of leaves, and for the first time in memory, the house felt utterly alive. Hermione had stayed. There had been no grand declaration, no single moment of decision. She simply never left, and the days turned to weeks until the idea of leaving no longer crossed her mind. The ministry sent letters, of course, requests for her expertise, reminders of duties deferred. but she answered few, and with each unanswered owl, her sense of belonging here deepened. Draco, for his part, didn't question her presence. He had learned that her silences meant more than any promise she could have spoken. They worked together easily now, restoring the manor's archives, tending to the enchanted greenhouses, and walking the grounds where magic and nature intertwined once more. The old wards had reshaped themselves, gentler but stronger, mirroring the quiet strength of their new masters. It was late one evening when Hermione found herself wandering the edge of the lake that bordered the eastern gardens. The air shimmered with the heat of the day, and the water reflected the violet sky like glass. A pair of swans drifted across the surface, their feathers catching the light. Behind her, footsteps crunched on the gravel. "I thought I'd find you here," Draco said, his voice soft against the evening air. Hermione turned, smiling faintly. "It's peaceful. The manor has so much history, but the lake, it feels untouched by it all, as if it remembers only the good." He came to stand beside her, hands in his pockets, gaze thoughtful. "This lake is older than the house. Cassian wrote about it. He believed it was the source of the manor's magic, the heart of the land." She looked out across the water. "Perhaps that's why it endured. It holds what the house forgot." He glanced at her then, his expression unreadable. "You've changed everything here. I don't know how to thank you." Hermione laughed softly. "You don't need to thank me. I didn't come here for that." "Then why did you come?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a challenge, but there was no sharpness in it, only curiosity, perhaps even hope. Hermione hesitated, watching the ripples in the water. "Because I couldn't turn away," she said finally. "Because you asked for help, and some part of me wanted to believe that not every story has to end in ruin." Draco studied her face, the twilight softening his features. "And did you find what you were looking for?" "I think so," she said, "though I didn't know what it was until now." He smiled faintly. "And what's that?" She turned to him, her eyes steady. "Peace." For a long moment, neither spoke. The sun slipped below the horizon, and the first stars pricked through the fading light. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of water and jasmine. Draco exhaled slowly. "You've given this house peace, Hermione. Maybe even me. But what about yourself? You've spent your life fighting battles, some for others, some for the world. When was the last time you lived for yourself?" She looked down, her reflection rippling beside his in the lake's surface. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've always believed purpose was what gave life meaning. But perhaps I mistook purpose for restlessness." "Then maybe it's time to stop running toward purpose," he said softly, "and start standing still." Hermione smiled faintly. "You make it sound so simple." "It isn't, but it's worth trying." They walked back together through the gardens, the lanterns flickering to life as they passed. The manor loomed ahead, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. Yet its gaze was kind now, protective. When they reached the steps, Hermione paused, glancing back toward the lake. "It's strange," she murmured. "I used to think this place was cursed because of what it had witnessed. But maybe curses aren't about punishment at all. Maybe they're just broken stories waiting to be mended." Draco looked at her, and in his eyes she saw a depth she had once thought unreachable. Understanding, gratitude, and something gentler still. "Then perhaps it's time we finish the story," he said. Inside, the house was quiet. The portraits slept. The chandeliers burned low. Hermione followed him to the old drawing room, where a soft fire crackled in the grate. They sat together before it, neither speaking for a while. "I found something today," Draco said at last. He rose and crossed to a cabinet, retrieving a small wooden box. It was old, bound in silver filigree. "This belonged to Cassian. I think he meant it for whoever freed the house." Hermione took it carefully. Inside lay a single key, wrought of greenish metal that shimmered faintly in the firelight. On its head was engraved the serpent and rose, Slytherin's mark. "What does it open?" she asked. Draco smiled faintly. "That's the question, isn't it? There's no lock it fits anywhere in the manor. I think it was meant as a symbol, not a tool. A key without a door, perhaps a reminder that freedom isn't about what we open, but what we let go of." Hermione traced the key's intricate lines with her thumb. "Then let's keep it here," she said softly. "As a promise." He nodded. "A promise," he echoed. The firelight flickered, casting shadows across the walls. The silence between them was no longer uncertain, but alive. Hermione could feel it, the slow, steady rhythm that bound them now, as natural as the heartbeat of the house itself. After a while, she rose and moved to the window. The moon hung low over the fields, painting the lawns in silver. Behind her, Draco watched her in silence. "You know," she said, her voice low, "I used to think love was something simple. Either it was there or it wasn't. But it's not like that, is it? It's more like the manor, layered, ancient, flawed, but still capable of growing." Draco's voice came softly behind her. "You think this is love?" Hermione turned. "I think it's the beginning of it." He crossed the space between them, slow and certain. When he stopped before her, the air shifted, charged not with magic, but with something just as powerful. "Then let it begin," he said quietly. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. The manor itself seemed to listen, its walls trembling faintly as though in blessing. And when Draco finally leaned forward, their hands brushing, the moment felt inevitable, the closing of a circle that had begun centuries before. The kiss was soft, unhurried, filled with the weight of everything they had endured and everything they were willing to become. The fire crackled, the portraits stirred faintly in their frames, and somewhere deep in the house, a door that had been locked for generations opened with a sigh. When they parted, Hermione rested her forehead against his. "That key might have found its door after all," she whispered. He smiled, his hand still warm against hers. "Then perhaps the manor isn't the only thing that's free." Outside, the night deepened, and the stars burned clear above the ancient house. The fountain sang softly in the distance, its melody carried on the breeze. And in that quiet, between the flicker of fire and the heartbeat of magic, the house of forgotten spells finally remembered what it had once been built for. Not power, not pride, but love enduring through the years. The days that followed unfolded like a dream Hermione never dared imagine for herself. Each morning dawned golden, spilling light through the high windows of Malfoy Manor, illuminating the house's renewed soul. The curses and whispers that had once haunted the halls were gone, replaced by a quiet rhythm that pulsed like breath. The manor, alive again, seemed to hum with contentment, as if the very stones rejoiced in the peace its inhabitants had found. Hermione and Draco worked side by side, not as savior and heir, but as equals. They moved through the rooms like two halves of the same thought, restoring, mending, building. The greenhouse flourished under Hermione's care, full of rare plants that glowed faintly in twilight. The once-forgotten gardens now bloomed in gentle profusion. Roses climbed over the marble balconies. Lilies grew along the fountain's edges. Magic, pure and natural, threaded through the air like a second heartbeat. At night, when the air turned cool, they walked the grounds together, lanterns in hand. Sometimes they spoke softly about the past, fragments of Hogwarts, the war, the ghosts of who they had been. Other times they said nothing at all, content in the silence that no longer felt like distance. One evening, a warm breeze stirred the curtains in the library. Hermione sat by the hearth, reading through a stack of restored journals. Draco entered, carrying 2 glasses of elderflower wine. "You've worked enough for one night," he said, setting one glass beside her. Hermione looked up, smiling. "I could say the same to you." He lowered himself into the chair opposite hers, the firelight soft against his face. "Perhaps, but I'm not the one who's been translating ancient runes since dawn." "These runes," she said, tapping the parchment, "speak about a forgotten charm, something called the Blessing of Balance. It was used to seal places of great power once the magic within was healed." Draco tilted his head. "A final ward?" "In a sense, but not to protect, to preserve. It's meant to keep the harmony stable, so it doesn't decay again." He regarded her thoughtfully. "And you think the Manor needs it?" "I think we owe it to this place to finish what we started." He smiled faintly, the firelight flickering in his eyes. "Then we'll do it together." Outside, the wind whispered through the ivy, carrying the scent of night-blooming flowers. The Manor's old energy stirred gently, as if listening. They began the ritual the next day at dawn. The instructions were delicate, written in an ancient hand, and required both wizards' magic, woven in perfect synchrony. Hermione traced the sigils across the marble of the great hall floor, while Draco cast the binding runes along the walls. Their wands glowed, hers a steady gold, his a deep green. And where the lights met, the air shimmered with pale silver threads. As the spell took shape, the house seemed to breathe, the walls exhaling years of grief, the floor pulsing with warmth beneath their feet. Then came the final incantation. They stood in the center of the hall, facing each other, wands raised. "Memoria pacis renovare," Hermione whispered. "Et domus vivat corde," Draco replied. Their magic joined, gold and green swirling together until it became white. The light surged upward, flooding the ceiling, the chandeliers, the portraits. The house blazed with brilliance, every corridor illuminated. The air vibrated like a note held too long, and then, with a gentle sigh, everything stilled. When the light faded, the hall was quiet again. But it was a different quiet, one filled with warmth, not emptiness. Hermione lowered her wand slowly, her heart pounding. "It worked," she said, her voice trembling with awe. Draco's eyes swept the hall, his expression soft. "Listen." At first, she heard nothing, and then, faintly, music, a low melodic hum, as if the very stones of the manor were singing. "The blessing of balance," Hermione murmured. "The house is whole." Draco turned to her, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that what they had restored went beyond stone and spell. Days turned into weeks, and the manor thrived. The portraits came alive with laughter. The old kitchen, long abandoned, filled once more with warmth and the scent of meals shared between friends. The house elf, who had lived in silence for years, hummed softly as it worked. Hermione found herself smiling more, her laughter echoing through rooms that had forgotten joy. Draco watched her sometimes, from a distance, as if afraid to disturb the peace that had grown between them. One afternoon, he found her in the west garden, kneeling beside a bed of wild violets. The sunlight dappled her hair, and for a moment he thought she looked like the first breath of spring. "Granger," he said, though his voice carried none of the old sharpness. She looked up, shading her eyes. "You haven't called me that in a while." "Habit," he said lightly, "though I could try something else. Hermione, perhaps." She smiled. "You just did." He crouched beside her, plucking a fallen petal from her sleeve. "You've changed this place forever, you know." "So have you," she said. "You gave it a chance to start again." He met her gaze, and something in the air shifted, a fragile awareness, like a heartbeat between them. "I used to think redemption meant undoing the past," he said quietly. "But you've shown me it means living with it and still choosing light." Hermione's voice softened. "You did the choosing, Draco. I just helped you see it." Their hands brushed over the earth, and for a heartbeat, she thought he might take hers. But he didn't. Instead, he stood and offered her his hand to help her up. She took it anyway, and the contact lingered just long enough for warmth to spark between them. That night, the manor celebrated. Lanterns floated above the gardens, glowing like captured stars. The portraits sang, the chandeliers shimmered, and the fountain played a melody that sounded almost like laughter. Hermione stood on the terrace, watching the lights reflect on the lake. Draco joined her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. "To peace," he said, raising one. She met his gaze and lifted hers. "To beginnings." They drank in silence, the air between them humming softly with magic and meaning. Below, the garden shimmered, petals unfurling, vines blooming in silver light. The manor's song deepened, a final chord of gratitude that vibrated through the ground beneath their feet. And when Hermione looked up, she thought she saw movement in the stars themselves, constellations shifting, aligning into a new pattern. For a moment, the shape resembled a serpent curled around a blooming rose. "The manor remembers," Draco murmured, following her gaze. "Then let it remember this," she said. He smiled, and for the first time in a very long while, it reached his eyes completely. They stood together until the stars faded and dawn began to wash the sky in pale gold. The house slept behind them, content at last. Its long vigil ended. And as the first light touched the horizon, Hermione realized something simple and profound, that she had not only healed a house, but found her own heart's place within it. In the heart of Wiltshire, where roses climbed the ancient walls and sunlight spilled over marble and ivy, the house of forgotten spells had at last remembered love. The summer waned softly, turning gold at its edges. The gardens of Malfoy Manor glowed with the fading warmth of August. Sunlight dappled the lawns, and the air smelled faintly of lavender and rain. The season's end came not with storm or decay, but with stillness, the kind that feels like a held breath before something new begins. Hermione stood on the upper balcony one morning, looking out across the land. From this height, the estate stretched endlessly, green and white and serene, a far cry from the desolation she'd first seen months ago. The air shimmered faintly with the pulse of lingering magic. Not wild, not dangerous, but calm. The blessing of balance had done its work. The manor no longer brooded. It listened, it lived. Below, Draco was walking the path between the fountains, a leather-bound book in his hand. He paused every few steps, bending to touch a plant or adjust a charm. He looked different now, lighter somehow, his movements less guarded, as though the walls he'd once built around himself had finally begun to crumble. Hermione smiled faintly. She had seen him laugh more in the past few weeks than she ever had before. Real laughter, not the cutting sort she remembered from Hogwarts. It had surprised her at first, the warmth of it, the quiet charm beneath the cool precision of his words. The breeze lifted her hair, and for a moment she let herself simply be. No ministry, no deadlines, no ghosts of the war whispering in the back of her mind. Just the world as it was, sunlight, stone, and peace. When she descended the staircase and met him in the garden, he looked up from his book, squinting against the light. "You're up early," he said, closing it. "Couldn't resist the sunrise?" "It's beautiful today," she said. "The kind of morning that feels like it's trying to tell you something." He smirked faintly. "You and your habit of personifying the weather." Hermione raised a brow. "You talk to your house daily." "Touché." They fell into step together, wandering along the gravel path. The fountain ahead murmured softly, its waters glinting gold in the sunlight. "I've been thinking," Draco said after a moment, his voice careful, "about what comes next." Hermione turned to him, her tone light but curious. "Next?" He gestured around them. "The manor's healed. The curse is gone. Even the ministry has stopped sending letters, thanks to you." "You make that sound like a complaint." He smiled faintly. "Not quite. It's just strange. For the first time in my life, I don't know what's supposed to happen now." Hermione considered this. "Maybe that's the point," she said softly. "Maybe you're not supposed to know. Maybe this is what freedom feels like." Draco was silent for a moment. "Freedom," he echoed. "It's a terrifying thing, isn't it? Only at first." They walked in silence for a while, the only sound the crunch of gravel beneath their feet and the distant song of larks above the fields. When they reached the fountain, Hermione trailed her fingers through the cool water. The surface shimmered briefly with silver light, the lingering echo of the enchantments they'd cast together. "You realize," she said, glancing at him, "that this place will outlive us. The magic here will hold for generations." Draco nodded. "That's what I want. A home that remembers peace, not blood." Hermione smiled, though there was a wistful note in it. "You've given it that." He looked at her then, truly looked, as though seeing her anew, standing there in the soft light with her hair stirred by the wind, the reflection of the water shimmering in her eyes. "We gave it that," he said. Something quiet settled between them. Not heavy, not fragile, something inevitable. "Hermione," he began, but then paused, searching for the right words. "When you came here, I thought it was out of pity, or duty. I didn't think you could look at this house, at me, and see anything worth saving." She shook her head, her voice steady. "It wasn't pity. It was recognition." He frowned slightly. "Recognition?" "Yes," she said. "You and I. We were both trying to make peace with the ghosts of who we were. I didn't come here to save you, Draco. I came because I needed to believe redemption wasn't a myth. He stared at her, the emotion in his face unreadable. And now? Hermione smiled faintly. Now, I believe it isn't. He stepped closer then, slowly, as though testing whether the world would allow it. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. I don't know what this is between us, he said. I only know it's the first thing that's felt real in a very long time. Hermione met his gaze, her heart pounding. Then don't ruin it by trying to define it. His lips curved in a small, almost disbelieving smile. You're impossible. I know. The light shifted, glinting off the water, and for a moment they simply stood there, the world holding its breath around them. Later that evening, as twilight deepened over the grounds, the two of them sat in the study, a single candle burning between them. Hermione had spread open one of Cassian's last journals, its ink faded but still legible. There's something here, she murmured, tracing a line of text. A final note. Draco leaned closer. What does it say? She read aloud softly. The heart of the house beats not in its walls, but in those who dwell within. Should love ever take root here, the house shall live beyond all time. For a long moment, neither spoke. The words seemed to hang in the air, echoing faintly in the firelight. Do you think he meant that literally? Draco asked at last, though his voice was hushed. Hermione smiled. Some kinds of magic are literal, yes. Others are promises. He studied her for a moment, then said quietly, Then it seems we've kept his. Outside, thunder rumbled far off. Not ominous, but distant, the sky whispering of summer storms and endings that weren't quite endings. The candle between them flickered. Draco's hand brushed hers, and this time she didn't pull away. Do you remember, he said softly, when you first stepped through those doors? You looked at me as though I was still the boy from Hogwarts. I did, she admitted. And you looked at me as though I were here to judge you. And did you? At first. She smiled. But then I realized judgment was the one thing you didn't need. He laughed softly, a real, unguarded sound. You always were a better person than I deserved. Maybe, she said. Or maybe we both just needed to stop pretending we were the same people we used to be. The thunder rolled again, closer now. Rain began to patter against the windows, soft and rhythmic. Hermione leaned back in her chair, closing the journal. The house sounds happy, she murmured. It does. Draco looked around, listening to the low hum in the walls, the quiet thrum of contentment that filled the air. It feels alive. It's reflecting us, she said. It always has. When she turned back to him, the light from the candle caught in his eyes, turning them silver gold. The years between them, the anger, the guilt, the distance, seemed to dissolve like mist. Draco reached across the table, his hand finding hers. Stay, he said quietly. Not because of the house, because of me. Hermione's throat tightened. I already did. Outside, the rain came harder, drumming against the stone, washing the world clean. The wind rose, stirring the ivy against the windows, whispering through the old cracks in the walls like a lullaby. And deep within the manor, something ancient and gentle stirred. The soul of the house, awake and whole, its long vigil ended. By dawn, the storm had passed. The first light of morning spilled through the high windows, falling across the two figures still seated by the hearth, hands entwined, The forgotten book of Cassian Malfoy opened beside them. The rose crest above the mantel glowed faintly in the sunlight, and the house sighed, content, eternal. For the first time in centuries, Malfoy Manor had nothing left to remember but peace.